Hello and welcome to the People's Planet podcast, where we explore sustainability in practice. Today, we are talking about knowledge transfer and how that can be a mechanism to really support sustainability in organisations. Marcelle, Usman, and I are all KTP associates. What is that? We're KTP associates. We're knowledge transfer partnerships. This is a link between universities and business. It is Innovate UK funded, the UK government's body for funding R&D and research, really bettering commercial and research within the UK. It's been going for 50 years now, since 1975. And reading off their website, they've helped over 12,000 people, big and small organisations across all industry sectors to innovate for growth. And that's the purpose of that. So we are very much at the forefront of knowledge transfer within our own different sectors. But today we're going to look at it slightly more broadly, a little bit more holistically. Marcelle and Usman are both experts in this, really. Usman has got a background as doing a doctorate, and so he really understands the academic side of this. And Marcelle very much understands the commercial side, having worked across this area for a long time. Let's bring them both in. Marcelle, Usman, it's very good to see you both on a lovely sunny Friday for once in Wales. It's very nice. How are you both?
Yeah, good. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Brilliant. Marcelle, let's fire straight across to you then. You have a background very much in that sort of, after you left the car industry, as we've heard in a previous podcast, you went on to supporting university and that link between university and business. Tell me a little bit more about that. Why do companies want to engage with businesses?
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually in terms of that whole industry academia dynamic, um, and how academia is perceived in the eyes of small to medium enterprise. I think maybe the relationship with larger organisations, it's stronger, and that could have something to do with the leadership in the larger organisations, because the leadership potentially has undertaken some form of higher executive level education with a business school interaction with the universities, and that hasn't necessarily occurred with the leadership in the SMEs. I'm not saying that it hasn't. So it's about perception and what business, those smaller enterprises, believe can be gained from a university interaction. Many a time when I was in the SME team at Warwick University, business owners have said to me, "Oh, I'm just a this, I'm not an academic." And I reminded them that they are the subject matter expert in their business, you know, and this is a
Yes.
collaboration where they can gain access and knowledge to some leading edge research that they wouldn't get access to under their own steam. And the theorists, and Usman jump in here, with the academics actually get to see some real world practical, and that's what we're all about here at the People's Planet podcast, that whole, well, how does theory show up in practice?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with that. One of the key things from the scientific research or research in engineering is always been the case of bridging the gap between industry and academia. And this is regardless of what country you are talking about. It's the same thing everywhere, I think, as far as I know and I've seen. Uh, Over the course of last 5 years, I have met many people from industry who were always very enthusiastic about getting universities involved in developing solutions for the problems. And the best bit is that it these companies are all sorts of sizes, from very small businesses to very large businesses. So, yeah, absolutely.
Does the business coming to university, does it have to be for a technical problem, or could it be, as you briefly mentioned there, Marcel, contacting a business school? Is it just for like purely like highly almost academic and technical questions, or can universities offer other support as well, and that knowledge transfer across?
And it's a good
areas.
point that you make, Simon, in terms of, I'm going to use that word mechanism and channel, in terms of, and we use the word about innovation, what you and I may have experienced in our academic life and our professional career as innovative versus just everyday normal business as usual. Some of that everyday normal business as usual type practices actually is innovative for some of these small businesses,
Yeah,
because they've never stepped outside of the small business and they've not necessarily been exposed, again subject to the leader of the business being curious, um, to some of these practices. We talk about lean, continuous improvement, Toyota production system. I mean, I'm talking manufacturing type practices. But fundamentally, they are a business, and there's certain things um, that businesses need to do to be sustainable. And I don't mean the environmental side of sustainable, I mean the longevity, future proofing, being around decades' time, sustainability. So it's a mixed bag, really, of need. Um, and it's a mixed bag by way of what are the channels to actually get what you need from the university. Is it a leadership type skill set upgrade, or is it business process, product development type help? So it really depends where the business is at. But businesses fundamentally are people. It's about the people that
yeah.
run the business. So maybe it's the leadership piece that should be at the forefront, with the rest to follow.
So that link with universities then, Usman said the term bridging the gap. Does it help companies bridge the gap between what is happening in research, and especially for SMEs, which may not be in a position to have massive R&D departments and sort of look at the future scope of their work, they can link with research that's happening right at the forefront of their industry and merge it into a commercial strategy?
Is that for me or for Usman? I don't mind. I can take it. Yep.
That's for you, sorry.
Um,
That's for you, Marcel. Sorry, now go.
Look, and I will bring Usman in to support what I'm saying. Objectives, to gain access to the academics in the university, the objectives need to be aligned, because my take on it, from a university perspective, is the research. Now, if my need and want as a business is aligned with the research topic of the academic and a particular department, then we've kind of got a good match. But outside of that, I think there's a disconnect, or there's a no connect. However, certainly at WMG, and this when we used to be in Europe and get ERDF funding, European Research Development funding, there's buckets of money that are there for the benefit of SMEs that need a delivery agent mechanism. And certainly at WMG and my SME team, we were that mechanism. So it wasn't actually an academic research piece that was going on that meant there needed to be alignment between the researcher at the university and the business. It was about really knowledge. And I'm not saying that research isn't knowledge, but it was knowledge independent of research. Some of the things that we were sharing were known and have been in place and in operation in other industries long time, coming back to say like the lean, and we need to bring in sustainable manufacturing. What does that look like as a topic? And so that initiative, digital innovation for manufacture, actually was a vehicle that allowed that industry university interaction to take place, but it didn't require there to be an alignment between a researcher and the objectives of the business. So there's many ways in which knowledge can transfer. It's about, again, the needs of the business, what are the objectives of the university, and a lot of this comes down to the funding. No funding, no project, no delivery. So we have to maybe lobby government a bit on this to say, if you want the growth in industry to occur through some of these interactions, you need to fund. There needs to be a pool of money to fund the interaction.
So that is a brilliant example, really, of where innovation can help, is if through innovative growth of companies, and they can access that research to support that. Usman, on the flip side of this then, and Marcel has touched on a few of these points, what are the universities engaging with businesses for? What do they get out of these partnerships? Is it a case of a practical implementation of research? Do they write papers, or is it something else entirely?
There's a lot of things that university get out of it. In my opinion, and without associating myself with any university, what I've experienced is that you get to have your students go to industry and experience those things. So it is not always the case that the university absolutely has everything at hand in their labs. So I once discussed this with someone quite high up in their career, and they said, well, for a partnership to work, there has to be a mutual benefit, and the mutual benefit in this is extremely important. So maybe as an SME, you don't have all the things that you absolutely need, so you can go to university, and the university is not, does not necessarily have all the things. So I've seen this in many partnerships, that it's basically coming together, putting resources together, and really working for the common objectives. And I would also like to touch on the thing Marcel said about the uh, managing the expectations and common objectives. I would like to add managing expectations to it. It's incredibly important, because it's different how you see things in academia, and it's slightly different how you want to look at things in industry. And now this is from personal experience. May not always be the case. It could change, as Marcel said. Businesses are people are different, so the way you look at these objectives is different. And going back to your question, what does university get out of it? Universities do get highlighted with for working with industry and working towards solutions what industry has to bring. And I think what companies can get out of it is access to state of the art equipment. It's incredibly important. I have highlighted that on many occasions and on many platforms, that sometimes getting your for example, let's take an example of product development project. You would need to do a lot of testing for that, and if you go out to a third party or company, they're going to charge you a lot. But whereas if you have some kind of partnership, a mutual partnership with a university, you will get those testings done in a certified way, of course, but at much lower rates compared to, because you already have an ongoing partnership. And one of the key examples for this is Rolls-Royce UTCs. So these are the university technology centers. Rolls-Royce has a lot of them in different universities. So they're doing all their cutting edge research with doctoral students, master students, and that's how they do some of the research work with the university. So it's a mutual partnership. University gets to get access to their resources, they get access to their university's resources. So yeah, there's a lot.
That sounds like a brilliant sort of place there, and a real big success story, really, because Rolls Royce are obviously a very well known company and a very innovative company. Now, Marcel, Rolls Royce do cars. I'm not sure whether they were the cars you were working on. That would be very epic if it was. But have you got any more sort of thoughts following on from Usman there about setting up centres within universities to aid your
Well, this is
research?
it. I mean, I wanted to touch on, I've used that word mechanisms a few times. Do we have the appropriate mechanisms? What are the ideal? I mean, I talked about my SME team, small to medium enterprise team, and you've got the UK catapult centres, of which I believe there are 7 dotted around the country. But they all seem to operate in a slightly different manner. I've had the opportunity to engage with them. That we had a UK catapult conference before I became a KTP associate, and I thought that they all worked in the same way. But the SME team at Warwick is actually kind of quite unique. You know, it's dedicated for the purposes of SMEs. So, yeah, it's about understanding, like in business, you know, the needs and wants of your target audience. And by their very nature, where do SMEs show up? They don't show up as a collective, they are these independent entities. So, getting your messaging out there to actually understand their needs and wants so that you can offer the best form of engagement is quite challenging. Like I said, I think the larger organizations, through their leadership, you know, somebody has gone and done an MBA or whatever it might be. So there's a dialogue already, say through the business school and certain academic connections made. But if you've not done that, I think it can be quite maybe daunting. Where would I start? You know, as an SME. So these are some of the things that I think need exploration and potential modification or improvement to get that engagement with the SMEs. I can't remember the stats exactly, but of all businesses in the UK, something like 90+% are SMEs. You know, so
So
how do you reach these businesses?
this is, and by their nature, they're all completely unique
Mm.
and set up in expertise, in resource, staff, time, money, what their objectives are as well. For sustainability, then let's think of that, and let's think of knowledge transfer and how that can be used as a mechanism to sort of aid sustainability across sectors. What, Marcel, do you think is the most successful mechanism for sort of embedding sustainable change? And then I'll come to you, Usman, to sort of ask how universities can support the
What I'm
sustainability.
about to say is going to go, of course, you're going to say that. You know, she's a KTP associate. But look, call it what you will. The model that is, oh, apologies, that is the KTP, I think is a good model. It comes with some, you know, everything can be improved. But I think having somebody immersed in the business to drive and bring about the change. And I say that because the DI4M initiatives that allowed us to engage with SMEs for something like up to 20 hours over a 2 week period. That person is persistent. Um, um, you show them the way, but then they don't necessarily have the skills and the knowledge, right? The knowledge has been transferred, but is it maintained to continue with what has been shared? Whereas an immersed entity as ourselves, as an associate, can actually help that.
I think it's you said a very important thing. Sorry, my throat is not with me today. You have touched on a very important thing, that who is going to do all this when I'm not going to be there? If, let's say, what's your legacy? And it's not, I'm not saying legacy in terms of, you should make all the efforts to change things as much as you can and work diligently on your project. But the key things that I have learned so far in my experience with whole of this situation that I'm in at the moment is that you have to make those changes in a way that they are received by the organizations you're working with. So I'll give you a very simple example. It's a very academic example, I would say. We all use certain work packages. Sorry, not work packages. Word processing packages, right? I don't want to take a name. Um, if you use that, and if I send you a document and you can open it and you can read it and do whatever you want to do with it, it's perfectly fine. On the other side, there are certain word processing packages that people don't normally use, but they're extremely good for scientific publication. They just make your life easy when you're writing a report or a paper. But it's, if I send you that, and if you're not well versed in that kind of working with that kind of word processing package, you're going to struggle. So it's just a very little example. I personally would really much be inclined towards using the other one because it makes my life easy, and I love the way it is. But you have to make sure that you're including these kind of things. So you might do a lot of data processing in your role, for example. But if you're using a software that is not open source, the company would have to buy a license to use that, and they might not be willing to buy one, or they might have something else in place that is being used. So you have to think about these things, that what I'm leaving and how I'm leaving it, and what how not what how the other person in my place is going to use it. That's one of the key things that should be in the communication, and that's not really talked about in many of the events I've been to. Or it's not a kind of it should be a kind of segment in the knowledge transfer, because knowledge transfer is all about communication. So whether you are delivering a presentation, writing a report, writing a piece of code, analyzing data, how are you visualizing it, how are you processing it? So it's very
I can add to
important.
that another example, um, by way of a questionnaire that we recently developed to send out to suppliers. And I used I am gonna name like forms, you know, you can work out whose forms, and it wasn't part of the suite. And because I was used to and had the knowledge and awareness of forms existence, I had asked for it to be added, because when I've been delivering workshops, I use it to get feedback. Now, again, legacy, when my project finishes, those results need to be accessible and what have you by those that are still there. So, a couple of people in the team had to also ask to have forms added to, their suite of programs. So yeah, what Usman is saying is 100% correct. You've got to be mindful of the legacy and things that we take for granted. If they're not embedded as everyday business as usual tools, then what we have done kind of stops there.
I think you've both perfectly highlighted the difficulties and the challenges that there are with embedding both knowledge but also change within organisations. Luckily for listeners, next week we have a very interesting episode with Rich Tricker, who talks all about leadership and the skills that are required to embed long-lasting change within organisations, both the personal skills and the interpersonal skills. So listen up if you'd like some advice on that. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate with you both. You've talked there a little bit about the difficulties of knowledge transfer at the end in terms of keeping that momentum going. Are companies not just better than keeping their money, keeping their time, keeping their resources, investing in their own capabilities, rather than seeking the help of universities? Let's go, Usman, first, please.
Yes, you can do that as a business, but then innovation is driven by collaboration, I think, and it's the biggest element in creating knowledge and sharing knowledge. So you might be able to do that as a business perfectly fine, and it makes sense financially as a business as well. But when you're reaching out to university, and specifically, for example, in terms, let's take example of KTP, for example, you are really getting expertise in return. So that's incredibly important. And now this is very targeted, specified kind of domain where you want to be working with, because KTP is backed by a project, and that project has certain deliverables, and that certain deliverables require certain kind of expertise and knowledge and skill set. So to me, the way I see it, and having, you know, discussions with a lot of KTP associates across different kinds of businesses and fields, it makes perfect sense to go to a university and get those expertise.
I think you've perfectly summed it up there, Usman. Collaboration is key and innovation is driven by collaboration. Collaboration doesn't just have to be with universities either. It could be with existing partners or with people who have already got access to that knowledge, people who have gone through a process. So it isn't just seeking the knowledge from a university, there are other avenues as well. Marcel, let's go to you. The same question. Anything to add on Usman's answer there, really?
Yeah, I want to talk about de-risking. You know, innovation for me is about stepping into the unknown, you know, and exploring the possible, which I think universities, that's kind of their modus of operandi, right? In terms of research. And here's where there's a bit of a disconnect because, you know, I could spend all this time researching and come up with nothing or not what I thought I was going to. And in academia, that's okay. But in industry, what do you mean? Spent all that money, all all that time, and you came up with nothing. So by having a university interaction, you've kind of, this might sound a bit controversial, you've legitimized, I'm going to use the F word, failure. But actually it's not failure, it's learning. It's learning. You now know, actually, don't do that. Tried it, done it, didn't work. Let's try the next thing. That whole ideation, is that right? Ideation, iterative, you know, fail fast, fail soon, move on to the next. But I don't think that's the mindset of business so much for the reasons that I've just said. However, when you enter into a KTP, you've totally you've totally legitimized that as a way of working, you know. And I say this to my company all the time: blame me. Oh, blame me, you know. As like, well, that was her idea and it didn't work. I'm good with that, but at least we had a go, you know. And in having a go comes the learnings. There may be some failings along the way, but for me, it's more about the having a go and the positive learnings of the having a go. And, you know, it's kind of maybe learning by failing, move on to the next thing.
I think that's a nice summary of the position of knowledge transfer, of having those common objectives, but having patience with each other and almost failing in a safe space. Because failure is just learning at the end of the day that can then be applied. If you never know what avenues that you can't go down, you'll never know the avenues that you do go down. Um, we'll start to wrap up, guys. We're all three of us really are at the forefront of knowledge transfer in our particular projects. Myself for sustainability and packaging, Usman, you're looking at composites, and Marcel, you're looking at circular economy. So let's each think, I'm going to go to you two first so I can have a think of one. Let's each think of one tip that we give somebody who is embedded within knowledge transfer in whatever mechanism it is, whether there is a business or whether they're in the university's end of it. Usman, you go first. One tip.
I recently started this lunchtime talks at work, and this was an effort to really disseminate the results that we have been getting from our project. And I think it's incredibly powerful in a way that you get to, first, you get to meet a lot of people in your company. Number two, you really are doing good work and putting your learning, so it just doesn't remain with you. More people know about it, the better. And it just improves your, you know, speaking, presentation, public speaking skills. Because the reason I'm saying this is that you might be a specialist, but your audience may not be a specialist, and it's an incredibly hard job to become a, you know, a better communicator. Now, not being a specialist is not, I'm not saying that, oh, someone is not a specialist. uh, for me, as an engineer or as a scientist or as a communicator, it's my job to make sure that whatever I'm saying is in a format that is understandable by people who are not necessarily at the same kind of, having the same background as I have, for example. And it's yeah, so it has helped me more than it has, if it has not helped anyone, it has helped at least me a lot more in explaining and, sharing my learnings and the key takeaways, time to time. It's very important.
I think that's a brilliant tool that anybody could implement within their business, no matter what, even if they're doing knowledge transfer or not. Having something like lunchtime sessions where you get a subject matter expert or someone who's been really heavily involved within a project, explain it to everybody. You not only bring other stakeholders on board, but you get a chance to consolidate your learnings and your knowledge and practice your delivery of that. So when you then go to speak to external stakeholders or potential new clients, new business, or you're applying for more funding, you've then got the confidence to deliver that. That's a brilliant point. Thank you, Usman. Marcel, over to you. One tip for someone at the coal face of knowledge transfer.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I had interaction with my KTP advisor this week, and one of the things he said to me was, knowing what you know now, what would you do differently as an associate? And my response to him was, about the capacity of the people that you're working with. This project is our primary focus. And I don't know about you and who's going to be listening to this podcast, but um, you will get a lot of sorry, no, not now. Yeah. And knowing how to handle that and respond to that, it can be demoralizing, but equally, I took it as a challenge. And in response to that question that he asked me about knowing what you know now, I said I would have sat down, say, the project, or spent time with the project champion and understood their perception of the team's capacity. Again, managing expectations and the capacity of the individuals that I needed to interact with. And if I felt that there was a disconnect, I would arrange a meeting so that all those parties came together to share about their capacity. I guess totally selfish and indulgent on my part, but I'm looking to do the best that I can as an associate in the business. And we are on a limited timeline, and having to wait weeks for people to be available, fill in the gap. What do I fill the gap with? I tried to pull work forward from a future stage into now, and it just gets messy. So yeah, having a better understanding of people's capacity for the timeline of the project would be something that I would encourage people to get known early on when you start.
I think that's a really helpful point there, Marcel. It really is. And you also said finding a champion of the project as well, external to you, because when you're involved in a project, you can often become so blinkered and almost forget that the world is turning outside of the project and everyone else has other demands pushing and pulling them in different directions. So understanding their capacity and finding a champion, I think, is a brilliant point. Usman, have you got any follow up on Marcel's point? And then I'll give my final tip.
Yeah, I just agree. I would just like to say that what Marcel said, commitment is very important, and having that commitment early on is very important because, from an engineering standpoint, for example, the machine shop, the various bits, pieces, the quality department, they've got other jobs to do as well, and those are the jobs that are making the money, the money that is circulating in the company at the moment. So obviously that's not going to be put onto a stop, and then you bring a research project, for example. So it's going to be the case where you have to, schedule things, like Marcel said, pull work from forward, looking forward. So it's really about managing that and getting a commitment as early as possible. And one of the most beautiful things that I've found in this kind of partnership, where research is being integrated into an industry, SME, is really trying not to fail at your experimentation, because experiments are another dimension of your work. Those are where you are really trying to innovate and bring a solution. But when you have a commitment with, let's say, a quality department, and then you said to them that I'll bring XYZ on date XYZ, and then your experiments didn't work. I think that's the toughest bit, and that's why you should be really good at understanding how you're going to schedule your your work plan. So really, if you're failing a lot in your experiments, which is perfectly fine in a research environment, try to schedule your fails so you can basically look forward. So yeah.
I think that's helpful there, Usman. My point, I've got three little sentences written down. I've got be mindful, and I think you've both summarised it there. Be mindful of each party. If you're involved in something, be mindful of everyone else's demands, how your work will be received. So be mindful. Be patient. It might take time. You might have to wait for somebody to get through their work backlog before they get to your project, or it might take time just to run an experiment, and the change might not be quite as quick as you think it might be. You might implement something and it just doesn't work. Be patient. The process will get it there. And the last one's have fun. You've got to enjoy it. You've got to enjoy your work. And if you are enjoying your work and you can show that within the team and the people around you, hopefully everyone else just gets a little bit more on board. So smile and come up with a few really bad jokes to start on Monday morning with, and I don't think it ever doesn't go down too badly. We're going to end the podcast there. Next week, again, we've got a very good episode to talk about those personal skills to really help a project moving forward. It'll follow very nicely on from this podcast. If you would like to get involved with us at any point, please do subscribe to the podcast on Spotify and drop us an email at any point on People's Planet Podcast at gmail.com. So thank you very much for listening, everybody. We'll speak to you next week. Usman, Marcelle, thank you very much.